And today we're going to be reading the first chapter of All Boys Aren't Beaut. But you? Yeah, get out of here. Yeah, get up in! Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maja. If you're new here, I usually do lifestyle, travel, and beauty content when I post, which I never do. But today we're doing bookish content. We're going to be reading the first chapter of All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. It's a book about the Black and queer experience from his perspective in America. If you want more information about the book, the author, or where to find the book, that can be found down below. We're going to go ahead and get into it. Introduction, Black, Queer, Here. Here he has a photo of himself. Let me focus it. There we go. He has a photo of himself as a baby with his grandma. Again, if you want more information about where to find the book, you can find it down below. When my aunt first saw my head full of beautiful jet black curly hair crown from my mother's room, she ran into the hospital's hallway where my family waited. "It's a girl, it's a girl," she yelled, to my grandmother's excitement and to my father's slight disappointment. But by the time my aunt got back to the delivery room and I had been fully born, she realized her quick assumption would soon need correcting. She ran back out to the family and said, it's a boy. It's a girl. No, it's a boy mix up. It's funny on paper, but not quite hilarious in real life, especially when the star of the story struggles with their identity. Gender is one of the biggest projections placed on the children at birth, despite families having no idea how the baby will turn out. In our society, a person's sex is based on their genitalia. That decision is then used to assume a person's gender as a boy or girl, rather than the spectrum of identities that the child should be determining for themselves. Nowadays, we are assigning gender even before birth. We have become socially conditioned to participate in gendering of children at the earliest possible moment, whenever a sonogram can identify as genitalia. Gender reveal parties have become a trendy way to celebrate the child's fate, staring them down a life of masculine or feminine ideals before ever meeting them. It's as if the more visible LGBTQIAP+ people become, the harder the heterosexual community attempts to apply the new norms. I think the majority fear becoming the minority, and so they will do anything and everything to protect their power. I often wonder what this world would look like if people were simply told, "You are having a baby with a penis or a vagina or other genitalia. Look up intersex if you're confused about other." What if parents were also given instructions to nurture their baby by paying attention to what the child naturally gravitates towards and to simply feed those interests? What if parents let their child explore their own gender instead of pushing them down one of the only two roads society tells us exist? When our gender is assigned at birth, we are also assigned responsibilities to grow and maneuver through life based on the simple checking off of those boxes: male, female, black, white, straight, gay. Kids who don't fit in perfect boxes are left asking themselves what the truth is. Am I a boy? Am I a girl? Am I both? Am I neither? As a child, I struggled mightily with these questions, and I struggled to continue to show up in various ways throughout my life. Now as an adult, I have a much better grasp on sexuality, gender, the way that society pressures us to conform to what has been the norm. I understand how this sense of normality doesn't hold a space for those of us who don't fit the aesthetic of what a boy or girl should be, or how a man or woman should perform. Unfortunately, we are still struggling to move the conversation past an assumed identity at birth. And LGBTQIAP+ people are not just fighting for the right to self-identify and be accepted in a society which is predominantly composed of two genders, which would be the bare minimum of acceptance. We are also fighting to survive physical acts of violence. Many of us are not even surviving that. The spectrum of our traumas can be as broad as our identities. I started writing this book with the intention that every chapter would end with solutions for all the uncomfortable or confusing life circumstances I experienced as a gay black child in America. I quickly learned this book would be about so much more, about the overlap of my identities and the importance of sharing how those intersections create my privilege and my oppression. Many of us carry burdens from the traumas of our past, and they manifest in our adulthood. We all go through stages of accepting or struggling with various identities, gay, straight, or non-identifying. And race and various other factors play a role in how we navigate them. Many of us are always in a state of working through something, always in a state of becoming a more aware version of ourselves. This book is an exploration of two of my identities, Black and queer, and how I became aware of their intersectionalities within myself and in society. How I've learned that neither of those identities can be contained within a simple box, and that I enter a room as both of them despite the spaces and environments that I must navigate. In the white community, I am seen as a Black man first, but that doesn't negate the queer identity that will still face discrimination. In the Black community, where I more often find myself, it is not the Black male identity that gets questioned immediately. It is the intersection with queerness that is used to reduce my Blackness and the overall image of Black men. Because this is a memoir, I'm sharing some of my most personal memories with you. These memories are specific to my experience as a kid, teen, and young adult. But they also underline some of the universal experiences of Black and or queer people. My struggles are that of Black men and queer men and people who exist at the intersection of both identities. That's where the manifesto part comes in. I believe that the dominant society establishes an idea of what normal is simply to suppress differences, which means that any of us who fall outside of their normal will eventually be oppressed. In each chapter of this book, I will tell you more memories of my experiences growing up and what I think they mean in a larger context of living as a Black queer person. I grew up hearing the word nigga, which was a term of endearment in my home. It's also become a term of endearment in many Black families. By the time I was in middle school, I was using the word regularly with my friends. It was the thing to do as a 13-year-old, that is, to curse and use the N-word. We were all doing it. It was how we greeted one another, how we clowned one another. We had different tones and inflections that could tell you the way the word was being used, but never with the ER at the end. We knew saying the word with the hard ER meant something different. By high school, I stopped using it. Surrounded by whiteness, I wasn't going to dare let my classmates get comfortable using that word around me or with me. Anytime a white student even tried to utter it, I checked them. White kids love to test Black kids on things like that. Certain Black kids were fighting so hard to fit in. They would let white kids steal that part of our culture just so that they could pretend they were accepted in white society. By college, I was back in a predominantly white school, back to using the N-word again with my new friends. It was just like middle school, except as an adult, I knew that I could use it, and no one could say anything to me about it. Truth be told, most professors hated that we used that word. They were of the opinion that the word had too much hatred in it for us to ever be able to take back full ownership in any variation. The N-word was the last word heard by many of my ancestors when they were being beaten and shackled, forced into enslavement in a new land. It was the last word heard by my people when they were lynched as a spectacle for white people. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees, as the great Nina Simone would sing. So, for many of my professors who grew up during Jim Crow experiencing legalized segregation, there was no reason to be proud of that word. It was during those years in college and right after college that the NAACP and the National Action Network decided that it was time for the Black community to bury the N-word. There was this belief that if we stopped using it, the word itself would lose its power. This brought out arguments on both sides, people for and against the action to destroy a word that is so tied to the most painful parts of history in America. I began to shift to the side that thought that it was best to bury it. At that time, I was learning how to be a respectable Negro with good grades and a college degree, attempting to fit into white society wherein I felt I deserved to be treated as an equal. It was important to me that I didn't use that word because I felt it made us less than. I felt that using that word was a bad thing because white people cringed when we said it, because certain Black people cringed when we said it. To me, it just didn't make sense to keep using it, especially because it remained controversial. I did what I always did with most things I didn't want to deal with, buried it. I wasn't trying to bury the N-word though. In burying the N-word, I was also burying my queerness. If I couldn't see the parts of my own Blackness as respectable, there was no way I was ready to see my queerness as respectable either. But now I know that queerness is a part of Blackness. and that there's no blackness without queer people. Then, early in 2012, Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman, and my entire perspective shifted on being a black person in this society. I saw that the new age civil rights movement was being led by people who looked like me, people who were fighting for me and other black children. It was during this time that my unlearning process really began. My eyes were opened by seeing the shooting of black people at the hands of the police, seeing the killing of black children like Tamir Rice at the hands of police, seeing that it didn't matter whether you were an affluent black, a poor black, a child, or an adult. In the eyes of society, I was still a nigga, and my love for my blackness meant that I had every right to fight for my people and every right to take back ownership of that word. So I started using the N-word again. I understand now that my blackness is self-defined and that to use the N-word or not to use the N-word is my choice. But it shouldn't be based off the comfort of those who constantly seek to invalidate me. I understand now that there's no such thing as a respectable Negro in the eyes of society, nor was I ever made to be one. Black. My second identity, queer, is a journey that I will be on until the day that I die, and honestly, I believe that. Every day I learn something about myself. I get to sit and look back at all the times my queerness displayed itself, both in ways known to me and unknown to me. As a child, I always knew I was different. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I know now it was okay to be different as a kid. That being different didn't mean something was wrong with me, but that something was wrong with my cultural environment, which forced me to live a life as something that I wasn't. The fact that I couldn't see my full self in black heroes or the history books was more about the changing of history to split white guilt than it ever was about me knowing the whole truth. I learned that kids who saw me as different didn't have an issue until society taught them to see my differences as a threat. Those differences, like being effeminate and sassy, were constantly under attack my entire childhood from kids who didn't even know why I needed to be shamed for those differences. It wasn't them shaming me as much as it was those raising them who taught them to shame others with those qualities. Most kids aren't inherently mean. Their parents, however, can make them mean. By the time I reached middle school and high school, suppression was my only option. I had become even more of a minority in the population, and I had to deal with the intersection of blackness and queerness and the double oppression that generates for the first time ever. Fighting for blackness in the white space came naturally to me though, and I did it every chance that I got. Fighting for my queerness, however, never seemed to be a viable or safe option. I lived in that isolation for all those years in high school. I only saw snippets of queer representation in small television roles. They were rarely played by people who looked like me, but it was never to the extent that I gained the confidence to be that person. Thankfully, college opened my eyes to the true reflections of myself in literature, in art, in class behind me, not early on, but right on time. I realized that the things I had always been running from had never left my side, that the things I had been chasing were all just a myth to turn me into someone I didn't want to be. In college, I took a risk and did something that was so far away from being queer that it should have put me even deeper in the closet. I joined a fraternity. Ooh. We'll come back to that. I was trying to preserve an image of masculinity for myself, something that black fraternities have run on for years. However, in finding that frat, I found myself. I found my brothers with a common experience chasing the same thing. And instead of the universe giving us what we thought we wanted, it gave us exactly what we needed. It gave us unconditional love and brotherhood with a shared queer experience. It gave me brothers who could see my humanity outside of my queerness. It gave me that confidence to define my blackness and my queerness and my manhood and my masculinity or the lack thereof. I got to live in my totality and for the first time ever exist as both black and queer in the same space and be loved for it, not shamed. Queer. I want the words of my life story to be immortalized. I want to immortalize this narrative of joy and pain, this narrative of triumph and tragedy, this narrative of black queer experience that has been erased from the history books, an existence that has been here forever. I've never thought about immortality before. I always assumed that my morality would be linked to my inability to survive as a black queer person. I have the deaths of so many people who look like me in my mind. From the HIV epidemic to domestic violence to suicide, I watched people like me who didn't survive the oppression. They became today's news and yesterday's headlines. I remember being nervous about writing a book like this. In writing this though, I realized that I wasn't just telling my story. I was telling the stories of millions of queer people who never got the chance to tell theirs. This book became less about having the answers to everything because I haven't been through everything. It became less about being a guide and more about being a gateway for more people to find their truth, find their power, and live in that truth. I often think about the statement Viola Davis made when she won her first ever Oscar. Something along the lines of encouraging people to go to the graveyard and dig up all the dead bodies in order to hear and tell the stories of those whose dreams were never realized. Those are the stories she's interested in telling. Although that is valid, I must challenge it. This book is proof positive that you don't need to go to the graveyard to find us. Many of us are still here, still living and waiting for our stories to be told, to tell them ourselves. We are the living that have always been here, but have been erased. We are the sons and brothers, daughters and sisters, and others that never get a chance to see ourselves nor to raise our voices to ears that need to hear them. Toni Morrison states in my favorite quote of all time, "If there is a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it." This is the story of George Matthew Johnson. This is a story for us all. And that is the first chapter of All Boys Are in Blue by George M. Johnson. Today is day 2 of the Joy and Justice Read-a-Thon, so you should be at 48 pages by the end of the day. Tomorrow is 24 pages, and the day after that is 24 pages, all the way up until June 14th, where you can meet me back here, and we can have a full discussion on Microsoft Teams about the full book. Can't wait to see you there. Bye. This book is an explanation of 2 of my identities. This book is an explanation, and how I became aware of their because this is a memoir, I'm showing, because it's a, oh my gosh. They were rarely played by people that, oh my god. But it was never the extent, I'm skipping over words. Today is day 2 of the Joy and oh my god.